Hey folks, this is JR with DIY Prepper. Welcome to the channel. As preppers, we love to talk about the idea of stockpiling, and the things that you would need would depend largely on the situation that you're preparing for. So today we're going to be talking about items that you would need in a long-term survival situation. These are items that you would definitely want to have, but would probably be very difficult to find during a crisis. And in no particular order, the first thing that you should stockpile is different fire starters. Being able to build fires is very important. You're going to need it for preparing food, you're going to need it for boiling water, and then also other things as well, like keeping warm. Disposable lighters are convenient and easy to use, but they're going to run out of fuel eventually, so get several. Zippos are fine for occasional use, but the big problem with them is that they allow fuel to evaporate very quickly. So they're not going to be something that you can just stick in a kit and forget about. But one thing they're very nice for is if you want to start a flame and then keep it going without having to keep your thumb near that. It'd also be a good idea to pick up several ferro rods since they'll continue to work as long as you have material on them, and you also need to have a good supply of emergency fire starters. Go ahead and make several bags of Vaseline cotton balls since they're cheap, easy to store, and can make starting a fire much easier. You can store a whole bunch of them at home, but also keep some in kits like maybe your get home bag or your bug out bag. Another thing you should be stockpiling for long-term survival is primitive lighting methods. While having LED lanterns, flashlights, and batteries is something that everyone should do, it wouldn't hurt to have a backup option if those lights stop working, you run out of batteries, or your rechargeables go bad. Candles tend to be the first thing that most people think of, and these can be useful in a lot of circumstances. But my main problem with candles are they present a fire hazard, and you're also going to need several of them to produce any decent amount of light. And since you'll be using more than one candle at a time, that increases the chance of something going wrong and there being a fire. So if you'll be using candles, definitely keep them away from flammable materials, obviously, and also use sturdy candle holders that won't tip over and will also do a good job protecting whatever you have those candles setting on. But when I'm using candles, I like to have them contained inside something like this candle lantern. The problem with these though is that the candles can be expensive if you don't make your own. Oil lamps and hurricane lanterns are another good option, and they're what I prefer to use over candles. Most of those can use either paraffin lamp oil or kerosene, so stockpile plenty of whatever you'll be using, along with some extra wick material which you can purchase by the roll. While these will probably burn brighter than an individual candle, they won't be nearly as bright as a modern LED light, so you'll want to have more than one on hand, especially for larger rooms. But when using any flame-based light or heat method, you also need to have things like fire extinguishers around so that you can deal with any accidents that happen. Another thing that preppers should stockpile for long-term survival situations is hand tools. While I love power tools, they are going to eventually wear out, and if you have cordless tools, their batteries are a definite weak point. Once their performance starts to diminish, that happens very quickly. A handsaw is a good example of a basic hand tool, and you can find these at pretty much any hardware store. But you need to have different ones for different materials. Wood saws are the most obvious, but also pick up a hacksaw and plenty of extra blades. When it comes to drilling small holes, hand drills, also known as egg beaters, are a good choice. When selecting these, just remember that drills with larger gears will allow you to use larger drill bits. And it'd also be a good idea to pick up some drill guides like these if you're needing to drill very precise, straight up and down holes. But if you need to make large diameter holes or drill deep, you're gonna need a brace and bit. While the bit won't spin nearly as fast as with an egg beater drill, they're going to give you a whole lot more torque. And braces use special bits like these that are designed to make clean, deep holes. If you want to, you can also pick up adapters that'll let you use them with 1/4-inch hex shank drive bits. Those would be good to have if you need to drive some larger things like deck screws, but you no longer have access to either a cordless drill or an impact driver. And aside from these, also make sure that you have basic tools like hammers, screwdrivers, and wrenches. Having the ability to build things and make repairs when needed is an important part of self-sufficiency, but the only way you're going to be able to do that is if you have the right tools and you know how to use them. Along those same lines, you should also have gardening tools. For shovels, try to get a few different sizes for different tasks that you'll need to do. Small trowels work well for planting things in the garden, while military-style folding shovels are a good size for moving soil and mulch into containers, and they also have the added benefit of being multi-purpose tools. Full-size shovels will be needed for digging holes or moving large amounts of material. And you should also have more than one kind of rake. Leaf rakes, of course, can help you keep your garden clean, while bow rakes work well for spreading out soil and mulch, tamping down soil, or doing other things like removing weeds or breaking up clods. Then there's other tools that you should have like garden hose and mattocks, and having a few axes and hatchets on hand will be essential for processing wood for fires and other tasks. And when selecting garden tools, don't be afraid to spend a little bit extra if you're able to. Those are going to be more well built, the handles are going to be made of a better material, and also they're just going to last longer. And since we're talking about a long-term situation, you should have some dedicated survival tools as well. The next thing you should stockpile for long-term survival is books, and a lot of your focus should be on reference materials. The Encyclopedia of Country Living by Carla Emery is an excellent resource. It contains information on topics like gardening, canning, raising animals, and other things that you would need to know to be self-sufficient. The Foxfire book series would be another good thing to have, and the way I look at it is it's the complete anthology of Appalachian knowledge. Between the 12 main books in the series, it covers things like how to build a log cabin, blacksmithing, and other things that you may need to know. So like the Encyclopedia of Country Living, it's just a good resource for a wide range of topics. Then of course, dedicated gardening books are good to have also. The Survival Medicine Handbook is a very comprehensive resource that can help you diagnose and treat different illnesses and injuries during a survival situation where you don't have access to a doctor. And you should also have reference materials for any equipment that you're going to be depending on. Things like shop manuals would be very good for helping you make repairs. Another thing that you should stockpile for long-term survival is medications. While it's a good idea to have a well-rounded supply of different things, for long-term survival, I think your focus should be mainly on treating and preventing infections. More severe survival situations will probably involve a breakdown of basic utilities and medical services, and that would be a perfect storm for many currently easily preventable and easily treated things to become a much bigger problem. Even small wounds could cause some very serious health problems. Antibiotics are always at the top of the list since they can be used to treat wounds and infections, and there's several services now like Jace Medical that can provide you with legally prescribed antibiotics from a real pharmacy. And while these services are expensive, most of them do a pretty good job of giving you a wide variety of antibiotics to treat the things that you're most likely to encounter. Antiseptics are also important to have, and the most common ones are isopropyl alcohol, hydrogen peroxide, and povidone iodine. For wound care, povidone iodine is a better choice than things like hydrogen peroxide and isopropyl alcohol because it doesn't impede healing, but there are some situations where it should not be used, like deep puncture wounds, burns, and then also if somebody has something like iodine sensitivity or renal disease. Isopropyl alcohol and hydrogen peroxide can both damage tissues, so they aren't the best choice for treating wounds, but they do have some other uses. Hydrogen peroxide, for example, can be used in your ears to help prevent or treat infections, and it can also disinfect surfaces. When diluted, it can even be used as a mouthwash. In fact, there's a lot of commercially produced mouthwashes that contain hydrogen peroxide. Even though isopropyl alcohol should never be ingested, it can be used for preparing injection sites and disinfecting things like thermometers and tweezers. It can also be used in alcohol stoves, which can help you boil water or cook. And speaking of that, you also need the ability to boil large amounts of water at once using natural materials. Something like a rocket stove would work well for this, as well as a Kelly kettle. Once water's cleaned, you can use it with soap to clean wounds before applying dressings. Triple antibiotic ointment and similar products are good since they'll help prevent infections, ease discomfort, and help small wounds heal faster. And then you'll need different kinds of bandages to help keep wounds clean. These can include things like band-aids, gauze, or butterfly bandages. In addition to treating illnesses and infections, you'll also need to be able to control their symptoms. Gastrointestinal problems are going to become a lot more common in a long-term situation, and those can get pretty dangerous if you start to get dehydrated. Cloperamide hydrochloride, also known as Imodium, is a good anti-diarrheal, while bismuth subsalicylate, also known as Pepto-Bismol, can treat diarrhea, nausea, and then also other symptoms, and it also has the added benefit of being able to kill bacteria that's growing in your stomach. However, it should not be used in children under the age of 12 or kids or teenagers with flu or chickenpox symptoms due to the risk of Reyes syndrome. That's because chemically it has similarities to aspirin, but in addition to all that, also be sure to have some braces or splints to deal with sprains or other minor injuries that are going to happen sooner or later. Another thing you should stockpile for long-term survival is water filters. Many popular filters out there, including those by like Zero Water and Berkey, use filtering elements that need to be replaced replaced over time, and some of them last a whole lot longer than others. So figure out how much water you're going to be running through them, figure out the lifespan of those filters, and then use that to determine how many that you're going to need to keep on hand. Grail purifier bottles are another water treatment system that require replacement filters, so if you have one of those, be sure to pick up some extra filters. And while those grails would not be a good choice for something like a large group or family during a long-term situation, they would be very useful if, say, you're on the move for one reason or another and you just need a very fast and reliable one-step water purification method. Sawyer filters, even though they don't remove as many contaminants as some other options, are still good to stockpile, mainly because they're so inexpensive. If you live in a remote area and don't have to worry about chemical or viral contamination in your water, they'll probably do a good job just on their own. But even if you live in an area where those could be a problem, then at the very least they can serve as a good addition to a multi-stage water purification system. For example, you can run water through them to remove sediment, bacteria, protozoa, then after that boil it and then run it through some sort of activated charcoal filter to remove any chemical contaminants. The next thing that you should stockpile for long-term survival is food, and the goal here should be to get as much as you can for as little money as possible. Also, be sure that anything that you choose has a very long shelf life. Salt and sugar can last indefinitely, and they also make good barter and trade items. Other dry goods like dry pasta, rice, and beans can last for at least a couple of decades when stored in Mylar bags with oxygen absorbers, and if you have anybody with food sensitivities, then other grains like quinoa can be stored as well. Heirloom seeds are good to have, but be sure that you're practicing your gardening skills now and not just letting your seeds sit idle for years while you have no idea what to do with them. Another thing that you should stockpile for long-term survival is clothing. When things wear out, you're not going to be able to just go to the store and buy something new. So whatever you have needs to be of good quality so it'll last, and you also need to have some spares. Long-term situations will probably require you to do more moving around and manual labor, and that's going to be harder on your clothing. So having extra things, especially like socks, underwear, and shoes, would be very helpful. It'd also be a good idea to stockpile things that you could use to make repairs to your clothing or other gear like backpacks or sleeping bags. Having plenty of thread and then also some extra fabric for making patches could help you keep things like pants serviceable for a much longer period of time. Have a good assortment of sewing needles for getting through different materials. And also, if you wear glasses, make sure that you have an extra pair or two. Glasses are something that would be very difficult to replace in a longer term situation since they're not easy to make and you can't just use any pair that you find. The next thing that you should stockpile for long-term survival is anything that has to do with defense or hunting. And the most obvious example here would be ammo, but if you have something like a bow or a crossbow, have things like arrows, bolts, and broadheads. Also, don't forget to stockpile things that would be needed to keep your equipment running long-term. This could be everything from solvent and cleaning patches all the way to spare parts. If you have archery equipment, then additional strings and cables would be good to have, and whatever you'll be working on. Make sure you know what you're doing. That's where some reference materials like shop manuals come in handy, but also have any specialty tools that you'll need to work on those things. It would also be a good idea to stockpile some barter and trade items if you're preparing for a long-term situation. A good general rule to follow for this is try to get things that are inexpensive right now, but people would be absolutely desperate for during a crisis, and preferably these things should also have a fairly long shelf life. Luxury items are usually a good choice, and these can include different kinds of soap, feminine products, and even some food items like coffee. Most instant coffee that you see at the store is already freeze-dried, so it can last for a very long time. It may not be as good as fresh coffee, but during a long-term crisis, people are going to be happy to get whatever they can. Now, going through this, you might be thinking, oh, he forgot this, this, and this, and maybe I did, but chances are I mentioned them in one of my other stockpile videos. So if you want to see some other items that you should be stockpiling for different emergency or survival situations, then be sure to check out these videos. Thank y'all for stopping by. Y'all have a good one.